So what prompted me doing this presentation and really kind of mastering this technique was a recent project with Adobe. Obviously, Adobe makes graphics products that are pixel perfect, and I was involved with a Power BI engagement for the for their finance group, building executive dashboards. And the team there was pretty knowledgeable in Power BI already. I feel like I brought some techniques to the table, and brought some value. But at the very end of our project, there was a comment that just kind of irked me, and it was that we have all these tables, and it's very hard to do the column alignment, and it kind of looks unprofessional. So I'm gonna bring up a slide that speaks to this. So what we're looking at here, kind of our side-by-side, an example of Power BI matrix visuals. And on the right side is the technique I'm going to walk you through tonight, which is using essentially a custom visual called the HTML content visual. And we're going to prepare a DAX measure that renders a string of data. The string of data is essentially a string of HTML that renders this formatted table. So I drew this on purpose. There's nothing wrong with your screen. I drew on purpose this red line, kind of just showing like the squirrely nature of like the default table and grid behavior. And I have in blue, I have "you're better than this." You spent so much time, getting the data model right and the data accurate, and you spent a lot of time on presentation. And it doesn't matter how long you sit in front of these tables and try to align columns, it's never going to be pixel perfect, and it's really frustrating. I wrote here it's very silly, and silly is the only word I could think of for this, that there's not a row width and a column width property that you can set in either the table or the matrix visual out of the box. It's very very frustrating. So what do we do about it? So on the bottom left, I have HTML tables, maybe. The reason why I say maybe is obviously that not obvious or not so obvious. There's trade-offs to this approach. Let me go into the next slide. I think I speak to that. But actually, before I get to that, I think this next slide is when would you use this technique? And then the slide after, I kind of explain the positives and negatives. So when to consider HTML tables. So my example, executive dashboards where pixel perfect rendering is a requirement in lieu of interactive data exploration. So I have a fictitious quote here. I don't want the user to touch anything. I want it to always look and behave the same way. And this would be from a CEO at a large company. Another thing, these other two use cases I kind of came up with while I was putting this together are if you've got Power BI reports embedded in web pages and they're not meant to be interactive, you just want to leverage the Power BI's data model to present data on an embedded report page. This might be a good use case for that. And then the third one really hit me as I was putting this presentation together, because man, it's so easy to. I essentially am going to show you where I just drag an HTML control on a canvas and drag a measure onto that control, and the whole table renders with data, with formatting, everything. So I was imagining, this was just an idea. This hasn't come up in the real world for me, but it's kind of interesting. And the idea would be that, like, well, what if you had all these pre-configured measures that could render tables, and you gave that to a user, and they just mashed up the report however they wanted. The trade-off, again, is that you don't have the interactivity that you would with a table, meaning you can't drill down, you don't have tooltips, the user can't sort things, but you do get something that renders nicely. So those are use cases when you might consider it. And just to reiterate, this is a really niche thing. There are cases where this might be useful, but this is not by any means a go-to approach for building Power BI reports, right? This is really special case stuff. At the very end, though, there's something really interesting, which is using CSS. I'm going to show you how I rendered shapes and then put data in the shapes, which I don't have this as a use case, but I probably should add it. This is a consideration maybe before you go the route of creating a custom visual. You might want to look what can be done with CSS in terms of rendering shapes. And then with the technique I'm going to show you, those shapes can repeat for as much data as you have. If you have 5 rows in a table, that custom shape that you render with CSS can render 5 times, and you can put data in it. You can do complex data in it. You know, so imagine a use case might be like a custom KPI card, right? That's using CSS to render it. I should mention that this required me going back to earlier in my career where I did some web development. You know, I haven't really worked in HTML and CSS in a long time, but it all kind of came rushing back, and I have some slides that give you some refresher on what you need to know. All right, yeah, so positives and negatives. I was kind of alluding to this. So the positive consideration is precise column alignment, centralized styling control. So I'm going to show you how in one place I can change what column width is, and all of my tables column width will change, or all my row group widths will change. Centralized control of styling, drag and drop simplicity. I mentioned this to render the results. Negatives: no interactivity, no drill down, no cross filtering or cross highlighting, no expanding or collapsing of row groups, and the configuration is cumbersome. I happen to get this technique down, and it's pretty easy for me. But your first stab at it might be a little challenging. And I'm curious to know everyone's feedback and whether anyone uses this technique after this talk is done. I think there's a lot of areas to explore with this. So I'll be curious to hear from you. All right, so as a starting point, I mentioned this is a custom visual. So you're probably familiar with adding visuals in Power BI. You click on more visuals from app source, and there's a search box where I typed HTML. A bunch of controls came back, which was interesting. This is focused on one control called HTML content. These are the controls that came back when I searched on HTML. And each one of these might have, there might be variations in this that you find useful. I just don't know. I've only experimented with this one called HTML content. It seems to render pretty complex CSS, and I didn't hit any limitations with it. Additional information, there's a URL here. This is, I think you can find it just in the app source store itself. They'll give you a link to this. But they have a web page. They have one example that I gotta say is pretty ugly, but it gave me kind of a clue into how to achieve what I wanted to achieve. So that's a good starting point, whatever the help that they provide on the visual. All right, so HTML table refresher. So I can't ask everyone to raise their hands, unfortunately. If I were looking at you all in the room, it'd be kind of fun. But HTML has been around a long time. You've probably come across it in your career. But what I've outlined here is the makings of a table. So fast forwarding a bit, we are going to be creating a measure that output is going to look like this. There's going to be one addition, which is going to be a style tag at the top of this, and that's where we're going to put all of our formatting. And we're also going to decorate some of these elements like the TH, which is table header, and the TD, which is a data cell, with some CSS style classes that we come up with. A CSS class is just a named version of a bunch of attributes, and I'll show you the syntax for that. Again, this might be really basic stuff, but I'm just doing this because I figured it might be a while since people have done that. But in HTML, every tag's got to be closed. So I have a table tag, and then I have a closing table tag with this /. a head tag. So the head table T head is the table head. This is where you put your column headings, right? You may want to format those in bold. You may want to do a background, things like that. So you put some formatting instruction on these TH tags. And then this TR block, TR is a table row. TD is, I think, table data, maybe, I'm not sure, but it represents a cell. So the fact that I have two of these, you can infer that there's two columns, right? And I put some sample data in between the tags there. So row 1, column 1 value here, right? So just a little refresher on HTML and what we're going to be creating. Refresher on CSS. So HTML renders from top to bottom. So at the top of what we're going to output in our measure, we want to have our style tag. And so that kind of loads into memory all this style information, or CSS. And then we're going to have our table section. The way this works is you have an opening and a closing style tag. There's lots of different, CSS is a big topic, right? But what I try to do is just kind of something basic and workable. So there's a period. Everything after the period, there's no spaces, but then I believe it's case sensitive, but that's your class name, right? So I called it my class name. There's an opening squiggly bracket and a closing squiggly bracket, and inside are things that you can easily Google, right? CSS is well documented. This is an example of, okay, whenever I apply this class to a like an HTML tag, and the way that would look, by the way, is so if this was my table header, right, I would have class equals, you don't put the period, but it would be my class name. Okay, and then column heading, and then you would close it, so th. Right. So maybe it looks like this. All right. All right, so what that would do is when the HTML is rendered, well, the word column heading is going to be left aligned. It's going to be this font, and it's going to be this font size. And I could put font style bold if I wanted, right? But this is the main takeaway, is how we're going to use these things, right? So HTML refresher, how do you build a table? How do you style a table, right? These are our HTML building blocks that we need to know. Now, what did I do with classes? Well, I'm going to show you in Power BI where I created all of these classes, right? And I put like just kind of generally the primary purpose. So I have a class called row title, right? So this is everything on the left side. Obviously, I want that left aligned, right? My columns, my data columns, well, I want those right aligned, right? And I'm going to have row values, right? So that's everything that's under the row title, right? Well, I want those left aligned. Banded row value. This is a class that just sets a background color. You know, banded rows is that design thing where every other row is, you know, has the background shaded. Call value, right? So we had call title, right? Call value. This is also right aligning. Then I have negative value, right? So I'm going to want to conditionally format my table so that I show negative values in red, right? So what I'm going to show you is, like, again, we're going to have a measure that's building out a big string of HTML. Inside that string building, we can do if statements. So I could say, like, you know, if sales, or, you know, if sales is less than 0, then call value. Otherwise, negative value, or no, if it's less than 0, then negative value, otherwise call value, right? And I can manipulate what classes actually get injected into the string that we're building, right? So this is kind of advanced stuff, but conditional formatting. But I didn't start out building all these, but I arrived at all these, right? And I'm showing you just kind of the final thing I arrived at. And then I've got, like, I'm gonna show you some tables where I'm grouping on things, right? And I want to format the heading of a group. Maybe I want to format the footer, and then maybe I want to do something different with my grand total row. The point is that these are all hooks where I put my formatting, right, into my CSS classes. All right. What is so what does it look like in Power BI? All right, it looks like this. I have I created I'm sure there's better names, but I just called this HTML style 1. I have another measure called HTML style 2. I'll show you why later. So I'm doing a couple things in here. For my, I'm not showing the full CSS, but the takeaway here is that you can see I'm returning a style. I'm returning a bunch of text, right? I'm encapsulating it inside of a measure because I want to all my measures, which each measure returns a different table. I want to centrally control my style, right? So I put that in its own measure. When I make a change inside this measure, it affects all my tables that reference it, right? So that's pretty cool. And then I went one step further. I'm like, okay, once I was rendering all my tables, sometimes the data didn't fit in the columns and I had to make each column wider, right? And because each one of my classes might have a width specified, I didn't want to have to go in and edit each one of my classes every time. Not that it's that hard, because I still do it in one place, but I further stepped back and said, you know what, I'm going to create a measure called style1 row width and a measure called style1 col width. And then I go and tweak that measure, and then that updates my CSS, and then that updates the rendering of my table, right? All right, so this is kind of just what the CSS looks like. And each one of these things, by the way, I kind of had to play around with, right? I didn't want any padding or anything in my tables. So a lot of these, like with regard to margin and cell spacing and stuff like that, those were just me kind of fine-tuning stuff. All the CSS is well documented. You can find working examples online easily. All right, so we're building a large string of HTML, right? So obviously, like, the style tag we already spoke about. We have that in a measure. You're going to have some things that are fixed, right? Like your table header and your table footer. But your rows, right? How many rows are you going to have? The number of rows you're going to have is based on the amount of data you have, right? Like in a table. So the key to making this whole technique work is a built-in DAX function called concatenate X. It has the X because it's an iterator function. It's evaluating every row in the table you pass it. Now, a common use of this is to present a comma-separated list of user slicer selections as an example, right? So maybe everyone has their slicers on one page. They're using the sync slicer feature and they're hiding visibility of slicers, but oh yeah, they want to convey what slicer selections are made on the page. Concatenate X is a great use of that, right? So here I have my department values listed just in a table. So one child is one row, men's is another row, women's is a third row. Up here, I've got a measure I call list of departments. I'm using concatenate X. It expects a table representing your data source. The field, the delimiter, which is a comma and a space in this case. The column you want to sort on, and then whether it's ascending or descending order. So that's how I achieve this first measure here, child, comma, men's, comma, women's. But if you extrapolate that a little bit further, what we can do is we can build out a table row for our table. And here I'm using the same concatenate X function. You know what, at the last minute, I added this values keyword. If you don't know what that is, when you wrap a field in values, it returns all the distinct values. The product table actually had a level above department, so many of the departments were repeated. Anyway, that's what the values thing is. But here I'm like, okay, instead of just printing department, I'm wrapping it in the table row tag and a TD tag. And I'm closing out each tag. This delimiter, you could have just a blank delimiter. I put unichar 10 So, and that's what's rendering this line break here. This is like in Power BI, this is a working visual. It actually looks like this when I render the output. So concatenate X is a key component of this technique. And it includes sorting, right? So here I'm sorting on department. This will come into play later. All right, so so this is ugly, but this is what we have to do. It's a 6-step process to greatness. Inside your, basically what I did is I broke down the contents of this table returning measure. Item number 1 is the most important task. These are, I'm using the var, keyword. This is the name of a variable. I'm calling my variable data source. And what I'm doing after the equal sign, this is just pseudocode. I'm explaining what I'm doing. Yeah, here's where you build a table of your aggregated columns and measures. So what I mean by this is that you need to summarize your data into a table variable, and then work with that. Okay, well, I'm going to demonstrate. This is the first thing I'm going to demonstrate, but I'm just going to talk through each item and then we'll go into detail. The next thing we need to do is define our CSS style, which I said earlier would be in a measure. We need to define our table header. What do we want to call each one of our column headings, right? This would be a hard-coded thing. Define our table rows. You just saw like a preview of that, right? This is going to be where we're going to use the concatenate X function against our data source table variable, right? Our pre-aggregated list of results. We need a table footer, and then what we're going to return at the end is a string, right? All of these table variables, they're really just, they're returning strings, right? This data source variable actually is a data table, right? Variables in DAX can store any kind of object, data table or strings or numbers, dates. So at the end, we're just concatenating this all together. I think I have that repeated. So we're adding style to the header, to all of our rows, and then we're closing out the footer and returning the final results. All right. So what does our table measure look like? It's gonna look like this. So I mentioned the first thing we need to dive into and understand is a function called summarize. Now you might have been working in Power BI for a long time and never used this before. I've commented, by the way, like at the end of this demo, my actual Power BI report file we're going to make available. Mark is going to share a link to it, so you'll be able to play with it and study what I built. Right, and I'm not expecting you to remember these screenshots and then go back to your desk and recreate this. But this summarize function is your friend, and the parameters are it expects a table, right? So in this case, I'm summarizing my product table. I'm grouping by a field called department in my product table, and then everything after the group by. So this is the syntax on the right that's in the help. If you searched up like DAX summarize, this is what it would show you. And the syntax is the same in all the Microsoft documentation. These are actually parentheses. This kind of angled bracket thing, this is like, it's telling you this is the kind of content you need to put in there, right? So what you need to put in there is a reference to a table. Now that can be an actual table name. It could be the result of any DAX function that returns a table, right? So you could have a filter, like the filter function is a good example of a table returning function. You could have filter for the product table, comma, some expression that limits the number of products, right? As an example. It could be, you could filter on like the current year and the date. You know, you could have filter and then your date dimension, comma, year equals, you know, now or something, or year equals the year function around the now function, you know, and that way you're always returning this year's data, something like that. Now, it's saying that you need at least one group by, right? You can't summarize a table without specifying a group by, right? So that's why this is here. What the square brackets represent and the dot 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 is these, anything after the first group by is optional, but it's also limitless, meaning you could group on as many fields as you want. So that's just how you read that information. And then whether you include measures or not is up to you, right? If you just wanted to return a summarized table, right, that just didn't have maybe the same maybe it was a sales table that had like item in it for many rows, and you just wanted to summarize it to show all the unique items. Yeah, then that's why this last part is optional. But the reality is this is where you put your measures. And the syntax for that, so you see I have table here, I've got a group by, and then I've got my kind of a name, comma, value pair, name, comma, value, right? So that's kind of the syntax. There's something else, a technique in here that I'm doing that I recommend. When you're outputting metrics to your HTML table, you should format that. You're going to want to format the data, right? And a nice way to do that is just using the format function, right? So this probably looks familiar. Format sales units, and this is the syntax is like, this is what the positive number is, semicolon, this is what the negative number should look like. You see I have it wrapped in parentheses, semicolon, what does the zero value look like? And instead of showing a zero, I'm showing a dash. That's what that syntax is. But notice I've duplicated the results here. And I'm doing something a little advanced here in my year-over-year metric, right? I'm storing I'm storing the measure called year-over-year growth, and then what I'm returning is a switch statement, checking for the condition of true, and when x is less than 2, meaning like I don't want my report to show like negative 4,000%, like that's meaningless to someone, right? So what I'm doing is I'm capping the upper and lower boundaries here, and I'm just showing less than 200 or greater than 200, right? And then if it's within those boundaries, then just format the value, which is x, this way. So this example actually has a lot of techniques in it, but I figured maybe you'll pick up something there. Now, why do I have my measures and then my formatted measures? The reason why I have this is the result of the format function is a text string. Now, if you want to do some conditional formatting, like I want to format year over year in red if the value is less than 0. Well, you can't test a string. So what I do is I have these accessible to me. I have the year over year % measure, which is just the numeric result, and then the formatted one is what I'm actually going to render on the page. All right, so there's a lot there to take in. I'm going to go to Power BI and just kind of reiterate why we're doing this in the first place. So what we're looking at here, the talk was called Pixel Perfect Table. So what I did is I kind of formatted up these things on the left, which are these are. If I go to visualizations, minimize this a bit. Okay, so this is our familiar matrix visual. I'm grouping on channel, and I've got these values, which are measures, right? When you hover over it, it tells you where it came from. So this is my sales, gross year-over-year growth. Now in here, I'm doing all kinds of settings, right? Like, so conditional formatting. If I went to year-over-year font color, I have a rule. If it's greater than negative some huge number and less than 0, then show it in red, right? So I'm doing conditional formatting there. I'm also doing subtotals, right? I turned on subtotal. What do I want to call my subtotal? I overrode the default, whatever it was, to the word total, right? And that's how I'm getting this here. In addition, I went under field formatting and tediously set all of these. So like units is right aligned, and then I checked off header, and I checked off subtotals, right? And then I went under units LY, and I did the same thing, align right, header, blah, 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 site totals, right? So I tediously went through and set all of these properties on the standard visual. Again, why we're here is this doesn't look very professional. And what people do in the real world is they go like this, and they go like this with department, and they try to line things up as best as they can. So I'm sure you've done this, and I'm sure you've went to bed at night thinking, that looked really good, but it's not perfect. And there's no measurement to know that it's perfect, right? You can get something that looks kind of good, but it's not perfect. And yeah, so that's why we're here versus this technique. Now, one thing that exposed this problem even more is when you have dynamic behavior. So I have, this is a technique that I do on all reports where I allow the user to, either expose it as a slicer or I have it set somewhere else on the page. But are you going to display the actual value, or maybe you want to show the values in thousands, right? Looking at large numbers in thousands is a lot easier to digest, right? So I highly recommend doing that. But you see what happens now is like, now I've got this like big ugly space here, and then I don't have a lot of space here, and what looked good a second ago suddenly doesn't look so good, right? However, this looks beautiful. So again, just toggling back and forth, right? You see this actually moved over and things change, right, as the values changed. And you might not even have this technique, but just over time, your numbers come in and they're not what you expect. And Power BI is going to adjust the size of your table for you and mess up all that tedious alignment that you tried to do, right? So this is why we're here, and this is why we're doing this. All right, just as a reminder. And I kind of say that in text up here. All right. So let me explain a few things. Let me back up a bit. All of this content is going to be available for download. And when I say all this content, it's really like three main things. You're going to have the PowerPoint that I'm walking you through. You're going to have this data source, which I mocked up in Excel. And then you'll have the Power BI report. Just for interest's sake, I'll show you how I mocked up the sample data. I did 2 years worth of data. So I've got a date dimension that has a contiguous list of dates, and I used some functions like year and some function here, and I built out what all this stuff looks like. Then I've got a product dimension that has 6 rows or 6 different products. Channel's got 3 products, region. And then what I did is I just copied all the rows, all the dates that we have. So just there's one transaction for each date. Then I used this rand between function. So I knew that there were 6 possible products. So I do rand between 1 and 6. For channel, I did rand between 1 and 3. I'm just showing you this because it was a fun way to mock up sample data. And sometimes you have to do that to build out a proof of concept. You might, even in your Power BI design for a client, right? Like you sit with them, you do your modeling, and they want you to build like a proof of concept report. This is a technique that I would do. I would figure out what their dimensions and facts are going to be, and I'd render facts this way, and I'd build my Power BI model this way. And then later on, when we wire it up to the database, I'd build out SQL views or whatever plumbing has to get done to return these same columns. But anyway, so then units, I did a bigger random range between 10 and 250, and then multiplied this and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so there's a sample Excel file. Why I'm showing you that is I just want you to understand the model that's in place. So obviously channel, date, product, region, and sales are our main tables. This numeric divisor thing was another dimension. This and this was just that technique I like to put in everything. I'll just show that real quick. All it is 3 rows, a divisor, right? Actual value, you're just dividing whatever the value is by 1. And then where this comes to play is in my on my sales table in my measures. Like if I were to look at sales gross, what is sales gross? I'm summing the sales gross field and I'm dividing by, I'm using selected value, numeric divisor, right? This optional parameter of 1 means if nothing is selected, what's the default? Well, if nothing's selected, I want it to be 1. Also, if more than one thing are selected, it will default to this. But if one thing is selected, it'll default to this. That's just the way the selected value thing works. Anyway, so, okay, so I have my, I like to, on my tables, I like to put all the fields that are in the table into a folder called fields. And I like to put all my measures into a folder called measures, just for organization. So this is just like a little walk through the model. Now, what I also did is for this talk is there's a lot of tables here, and there's some subtle differences in what's going on. This, if we look at, oh, sorry, that's the here's the HTML version. So we know in Power BI when we highlight a visual, it gives us a yellow mark on where what's being used, and here we see the HTML sales by channel measures being used. So this I put in a folder called simple table with a grand total. Why is it simple? It's simple because it has no groupings here, right? It's just returning just channel, right? Simple data, not grouped. However, there's a grand total, right? And how do you do that? So a little earlier I mentioned that the most important thing, first step, is that you aggregate your data in a way that renders everything you need to come back in the final table, right? So let's take a look at what that means. So we know that this whole table is being rendered by this measure, and we're going to open up that measure. This is really ugly, so we're going to use external tools. I don't know what that delay is there. External tools. All right. And I like to work in tabular editor. Another tip here is that this button for tabular editor will not be there by default. You have to install tabular editor. Once tabular editor is installed on your machine, that button will appear. Recently there's a paid version of tabular editor, and then there's a free open source version. You want the free open source version, which is available on GitHub. And it's just a nicer environment for working with measures. You're not limited to a very small window. You got a large window for working with measures. So we're going to go and expand this measure. So we have a nice big screen that I can talk you through what's going on. Actually, you know what? Even before this, let's start here. The most basic of examples. So I mentioned that. Well, first of all, I spent today commenting all these measures so that like kind of gives a description of what it's doing. It summarizes a single data column. There's no subtotals, there's no grand total, and it sorts on a column value, right? That's what this output's going to be. So this is really basic. Here I'm defining a variable called source data, right? And I said the starting point for everything is this right here, and summarize is your best friend. Now, this is really straightforward. I mentioned that it expects a table, a field to group by, and then you come up with names. These become your new column names. If I scroll further down where I'm referencing column names, I'm referencing formatted units LY department. Okay, those are the things that I've defined in here. Now, how do you debug this? How do you know that the summarize function is doing what you want it to do? So with any development that you do, you always break things out into digestible chunks. So before you start, and this technique stacks a lot of things on top of each other, right? So we want to make sure that each thing in the stack works. And how do you do that? So what I'm going to do here is, this is just for demonstration purposes, so you know that this is possible. I'm going to copy this summarize statement. I'm going to close out of here. And in Power BI, you may or may not know this, but if you click on the modeling tab and you click on this guy, write a DAX expression to create a new table, right? So I'm going to do that. And inside here, I'm going to give it a name. So I'll call this like simple table demo equals, and I'm just going to paste in that summarize statement, right? I'm going to click OK. Click this check mark. All right. Now, what can we do here? I'm going to create a new page, and I am going to use just a regular table visual, not a matrix. And I'm going to put some of those columns on here. So here's our table. You see it's got this icon with the calculator. And I am going to drag department on it. And let's put formatted sales, LY, right? Formatted year over year %. Now, this is just a regular table, right? This is not HTML. But what it's showing me is that it's just, like I said, it's simple. It is performing the aggregation on department. It is, because I put those measures from our sales table, and let me just back up a bit. See how the sales table is linked to the product table, right? You know, I don't want to skip over this step, right? This is like kind of just basic Power BI understanding. Like there's a relationship between this table and that table, and that's why I can mix these two things. So I can group on field in the department dimension, and because it's related to sales, because there's a relationship, I can use measures from the sales table. And I'm just showing that those measures got aggregated for us, right? So that's kind of cool. There's one thing though. Yes, you can create a DAX table like this, but this, keep in mind, this is for debugging purposes only, right? I went down this path. I'm like, oh, maybe I should just build these summarized DAX tables and then use them in my function rather than defining, in my measure rather than defining them in the measure. The reality is this got evaluated once, and it's not further getting evaluated. Meaning when I filter on year or I have other slicers on the page and stuff, it's not going to, there's no relationship between this table and all the other dimensions. The relationship got lost. I created a copy of the information and aggregated it, right? So, so that's important to know. This is just kind of for debugging, right? So, but I want to add a grand total, right? So that's where I'm going to go to this number 2. And I numbered them in the sequence that, like, when you're playing with this each thing builds a new technique, right? So, all right. So how do we do a grand total? All right. So let's click on that measure, and I'll just copy the DAX from in here. I know the DAX works. It's just not formatted as nice as a tabular editor. I'm going to copy this out. I'm going to go to modeling. I'm going to create a new table. All right, and I'm going to call this simple table with grand total demo equals, and then let me paste this in, and then we'll talk about it. What did I miss? Grand total demo equals oh, I don't need the variable. I just want the summarized statement. Okay. All right, so let's do the same thing here. Let's add a little bit delay there. Okay, let's add a table. Now, from here, what do we have here? Oh, yeah, let's grab channel, and then let's grab our formatted sales. Okay. All right. And by the way, let's I'm going to turn on subtotals here just to show that the values are working. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't subtotal text, right? So I actually should have just dropped sales on here. Okay. All right. So what I want to show you is this here. This is a regular table visual, right? But I added subtotals. here, and let me do the same thing. Let me drag just sales and show you what will happen if I do subtotal. Now see how if I subtotal this, the result of this, I'm getting a number that's double, right? That's because I've already got a row in my results that is the total, right? So again, our goal here was to create a result that will just print as is in HTML, right? We don't have this total ability, right, in the grid, right? So just a reminder about that. All right, so what we have here is we have a blank channel, okay? How did this happen? So let's go into the DAX here, and you know what? I like to use this, as I mentioned, tabular editor. Okay. And yeah, let's look at the technique here. Okay, there's a lot more going on here than what we had before. Before we just had like we were grouping on like product and then department, right? Here what we've introduced is something called roll-up group. And what roll-up group does is it still aggregates all my data by channel, right? So if I omitted roll-up group and I just had it read channel / channel, or channel table, channel column, it would, the summarize statement would aggregate that, right? By adding the keyword or the function roll-up group, what it does is it outputs a row with a blank channel value, right? That happens to be your total, right? So this is where it starts getting a little more complicated. So I basically I added my own column, right? This is column name, column value. So I'm calling this channel group, and I'm saying if channel is blank, well then print the word total channel, otherwise show the channel, okay? So what that means is rather than showing channel here, if I showed channel group, let me go back to the fields here. Okay. So the default channel field, right, is blank here because this is a row that was created by that that group total function, right? And here, this is a custom field I created called channel group, where I say no, that's should be called total channel. If channel is blank, call this total channel, right? Now I've got my totals. Now the problem is that, well, this is not the way I want. I want my total at the bottom, right? I don't even know what sort order this is. Am I sorting like alphabetical or like what's going on? Right? So our first challenge was to get the grouping, which we have now. The second challenge was, well, I want to call it something, so we solved that. And the final challenge with this, and we didn't even get into conditional formatting yet, but the third challenge, then I'll say, is sort order, and how do we solve that? All right, so we go back to the DAX. So this took a little while, to be honest, for me to get my head around, but I think I came up with a solid technique. All right, so some refresher. We all know that we can use variables in measures, right? You can do var and come up with a name and set it to something. What you might not know is that inside like a switch statement or inside inside any area that requires an expression, let's say it's a function in this case that requires a name and then a comma expression, name, comma expression. Anywhere where there's an expression, you can break out and do this variable thing, right? And then use a return statement. So that's a building block you need to understand for this. So what is the real challenge here? The real challenge is that I'm going to end up with a row that that I want to make my total row, and I want my total row to be on the bottom, right? So I need to sort all my channels, and then when I get to that total row, I want that to be one number higher than whatever my sort order was, right? So first thing I do is I get a channel count. So I do calculate count of the channel, and I'm filtering on all channels, right? So just give me all channels, right? Whether my visual was showing all channels or not, it almost doesn't matter. Like, let's say my thing was filtered to only show 3 channels. The result of this channel group sort would be 1, 2, 3, and let's say the table had 20 values. The sort would be 1, 2, 3, 21. But who cares? It's still at the end, right? So you could get more specific with this, like maybe instead of all, maybe use all selected, but it really doesn't matter. I'm getting a count of all possible channels, right? And then the second variable I'm doing is I'm using this rank function, and I'm just ranking all the channels based on the channel field itself, ascending order, and then one of these parameters is dense. And basically what this does is it returns 1 for alphabetically the first channel, 2 for alphabetically the second channel, onwards, right? So then the final thing is now how do I make use of these numbers? So what I return is if the channel is blank, which we know to be our channel row, then return the channel count plus 1. Otherwise, show the channel rank, right? So this one, again, took me a little while to work out, but let me show you what that returns. So now I have a field called channel group sort. And let me put that up here. Now, if I were to just in this regular data grid sort by channel group sort in ascending order, well, look what happens. Now I've got e-commerce, retail, wholesale, and I've got my total at the bottom, which is what I wanted. So that was the third thing. The first one was how do we get a total? Second thing is how do we name the total? Third thing is how do we sort? All right, and all of this is debugging, right? Like this is me constructing a table inside DAX here, and I'm arriving at something that I can work with here, right? But we're not done yet. Well, we're done with constructing the table, actually. Sorry, I take that back. All right, so if we go back to our HTML here, and you know what, I like doing that in here better. Let's go to sales, HTML, this guy. All right, so this summarize block, this looks familiar. We've already validated this, right? We already know that this is working for us, right? Now, what we wouldn't have known starting out, and I would say like just use this HTML style that I came up with as a starting block and then customize it from there. But I don't, helper measures is where I put this thing, so HTML style. So here's where I've got my CSS defined, right? I got my row title, my call title, all of this stuff. If you didn't have this and you rendered a table without a style tag, it would be pretty ugly. Yeah, but right now it's going to look good because I have that in there. But let me go back. Okay, so this is vetted. The CSS, let's just trust for now that it's okay. Now, what are we doing? What we want to do is we want to return, and again, this is our simple table example. We want to return channel, units last year, sales last year, and then year-over-year growth, right? So what I've done is I have these TH tags for all of those things, right? But I've also decorated them with a CSS class. So this is where I was saying earlier in the beginning of the talk, I said like I've got row title. So what that is that's formatting, which is like a bold heading and left line because it's a row title. Column titles for my data, this is a bold heading, but it's right aligned. And if I went back and looked at the CSS class, that's just what it's doing, right? So this is pretty static. It is static. You know what you want to build, right? All right. So the next thing is, look what we're doing here. Concatenate X. Up top here, remember we said we validated what our table look like, right? And we did that by pasting it into a DAX table and confirming we had all the pieces we needed. Well, we store that in a variable called data. Further down here, I'm using concatenate_x, which needs a table, and then we're building a string. And before, if we go back to that slide, I had a very simple example where I'm just hard coding in the TR, TD, and then putting in the column value department, and we got data that looked like this guy, right? We had three records, we got 3 table rows, 1 column in that. So that's where we're at. We're at this concatenate_x, and so we're opening a TR tag, and we're doing a bunch of stuff in here now. So I'm just going to walk through one by one, and I'm also going to mention something else about CSS that you might not know. So if you remember before, I was saying like if channel was blank, then that meant that it was the total row. You don't have to do this. I could have just tested for blank. This is all just preference, but is blank returns a true or false, right? So in my results here, I include is channel group total, and then I can reference that in my code here. But what's cool is that I can mix in here, like I'm concatenating a string, right, at the end of the day. So, and I've got ampersands in between everything. So what's really awesome is I can do conditional tests in here. And I could say if this was, as I'm rendering rows, if this is a channel group total row, then I want you to print this CSS class. But notice there's a space in the front, right? So this is an important like refresher for CSS, is that you can have multiple classes and they all get kind of unioned together in the background. So my grand total, row value already left aligns my data, right? It already sets my font size in points and the font name, right? The only difference here is I want to do some shading of the background and I want to make the font bold, right? So that's what this grand total class is going to do. So what I'm doing is if it's a total row, I'm injecting this class, otherwise I'm doing nothing, and then I'm closing the tag out, right? So that's an example of some conditional formatting. How are we doing for time, by the way? Mark, do you want to jump in?
We are at 8:11.
And I have a lot to cover. Do we want to stop at 8:30 or?
We should probably stop at 8:30, but it depends on how close you are to the finish at that point.
Okay. All right, so we'll plan on 8:30 stop. So in like a little over 15 minutes. All right, thanks. Okay. So I just want to mention that right, we are still building a string. We open the table row, table data. Here I'm saying like if it's a channel group total, then print the word total. Otherwise, show channel group, right? And yeah, and then the rest is this all the same with one exception. This is where I'm going to do some conditional formatting of my year over year if it's negative, right? So here I'm doing if year over year, not the formatted year over year, right? Remember I exposed both fields because this is a numeric value, this is a text value, right? Formatted nicely for printing, it shows negative 200 or greater, less than 200 or greater than 200, all that stuff, but it's text. This is numeric, so I can do an evaluation. And if it's less than 0, I use my negative value class. Otherwise, I use my column value class. And then I append the same test for grand total, right? Concatenate_x has a couple of other parameters. One of them is what to sort by. And I'll tell you that it can only accept one field for that. I have another example. At this point, I'm going to kind of rush through all the different techniques. And again, you'll have the Power BI thing to look at. But we're almost done with this one. Later on, I have an example of grouping on 3 levels, and I need to be able to sort that, and you'll see the technique that I do for that. But right now, we invented that channel group sort field, if you remember, that number 4, well, the 1, 2, and 3, and the number 4, more importantly, for the total. And now we're gonna use that in the concatenate_x. Then we close things out, and what we return is a long string that appends the style, the header block, your row block and your footer block, right? And I'm going to close that. Yeah, so now the end result is if I took the HTML visual, and I think it was this guy, yep, drag that in. Now we've got this rendered. See how, like, I can't click on this column to sort it, right? But it is sorted the way I want it to be sorted, right? It was all because of that logic in the sort column that we did. And this bottom row, the total row, because of what that logical test we were doing, where we unioned in a kind of like another, or appended another CSS class, that's how we're getting the total on the bottom here. On that year-over-year column, where we had a logic test that said if year-over-year is less than 0, then negative value, otherwise call value, which is just renders it like this. So all of those pieces were kind of staged in DAX, and we're outputting the HTML. Now, this might cause me, what I'm going to show you right now might cause me to have to close Power BI, and I think the problem is it runs out of space, but let's see if I can do it. It was some, what was it, copy visual? There was some, maybe I can't even get there. Oh, I thought there was some way to right click and show the HTML. No. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So I did right click show as table, rendered the HTML. This is actually what's going on behind the scenes, right? So there's our style tag. That's in my that's in my HTML style 1 measure. All of this code. Pretty nice that it's not all in that one measure, right? It's or in the final thing. That'd be a lot of code. It's all that, but then we start with the table head, right? Class is row title, channel, right? And here's where we're going to see where our conditional stuff got injected, right? So our class down here, I can already see that my class is call value space grand total, right? So that's the technique in action. Now, something cool that came up, by the way, on this home page, just for reference, just so you understand how the Power BI report set up. This is showing regular tables. This is showing HTML tables. This is a little refresher on concatenate X, right? This is the key component of building rows. Then what I did is I have a Power BI table version, right? All of these objects are Power BI tables, and then I have the pixel perfect HTML rendering. And again, if I change this to actual values or thousands, doesn't matter, everything looks perfect, right? But again, the trade-off, no interactivity. I can't do anything with this as an end user. This is the point where where users might switch to reporting services or some other tool to render pixel perfect stuff. And hopefully what you see with a takeaway with this is that you can do this in Power BI, right? Just kind of have to get a little creative. Now I'm going to show, I'm going to jump ahead and show you this awesome thing. And then I'm going to go back and show you some not so awesome things, but some techniques that you might find yourself doing. All right.
Okay,
So,
in the meantime, James,
yeah.
just polling the audience a little bit about how long to go. So I know that a few people have weighed in that there are a few questions at some point. Maybe you could pause and answer. So maybe not right this second, but you could pause and answer and then maybe continue on.
All right.
And
yeah, I just need
it's okay to go beyond 8:30, but go ahead and finish your thoughts and
okay.
What you're demoing now, then maybe you answer some of the questions that have been posted.
I'll definitely take questions and I'll add them to a list because I'm curious myself. I know there's a lot more areas I want to explore with this. With what I'm going to show the group right now, I think your mind is going to be blown. You're going to be like, whoa.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on. Well, let's hope we don't blow up Teams. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So what are we looking at? I had this thought after kind of mastering tables. And by the way, when I say mastering tables, I'm gonna I have I got like, okay, one group was hard, two groups was harder, three groups was really hard, and involved like a couple of new techniques. One of which was inventing a sort column that concatenates all the levels together. That's what this guy is. Because of time, we probably can't get into this, but it's working. You know, you see the end result here. And walking through what I was showing you, where I've kind of organized things into, like, if you expand HTML, I've ordered them, right? They're kind of level of difficulty, right? But all right. But so I finished all of that stuff, and putting this whole talk together took honestly like a few days, and I was still kind of learning things along the way. But about a couple hours before this talk, I went to bed the other night thinking, like, wow, you know, if CSS is supported, there's probably some awesome stuff you can do. And what I did was, first of all, I mentioned like CSS, you can Google it. And if you Googled like rendering shapes with CSS, you'd be probably pretty blown away with what's possible. Really complex shapes and patterns. I was on a project with a company where we had to build custom visuals, custom KPIs. And it was a successful project. We did it in the time that we budgeted. Knowing this technique now, I wonder if we would have solved it the same way, to be honest, because interactivity was not a requirement for the custom visuals that we built, right? Rendering them to look a certain way was and exposing formatting properties was a thing, but it wasn't interactive. It didn't need to be interactive. So what's going on here? Well, let me show you some behavior, and then I'll show you what's going on. Check this out. This is an HTML control. Look what happens when I resize this thing. That's pretty cool. Look at that, and now it's vertical. Not possible with standard Power BI visuals, right? Pretty mind-blowing. This is a simple shape, and this took like seconds to put together. Once I had the CSS, right? And so let me show you what the CSS is for this guy. Rather than putting the CSS code in its own measure and all that stuff, this is an all-in-one working example. So I define a CSS variable. This block, and you recognize the period and then the class name. In this case, it's called circle. Everything in here I got off a website. I didn't know to create this myself, but you can see there's some advanced stuff in here that happens to be supported in this HTML control, which is pretty amazing. And again, these were new to me. Clip path, circle, shape outside, circle. Background, that's pretty straightforward. Display, flex, not exactly sure what that means. Align items and align self. These actually I had to look up because when I was rendering text, I wanted it to be centered. So I had to do some Googling, put on a snorkel mask, and did a deep dive to find this stuff, but pretty easy. So the final result is I'm storing all of the unique department values in a variable called data. And again, I'm just returning a large string. I'm returning my CSS, which has to be first, right? The styling has to be first. And then I'm using concatenate X. No, instead of a table, I'm just using a div tag, right? A div tag is like, in HTML, is like, you can put whatever you want inside there. It's like a way of, people use it as a way of encapsulating an area. It's like, and then applying a style to it. So like, sometimes like an entire web page will have a div tag, and that inside that div tag is where they set like the background or something. In this case, I'm just setting the div tag to my class circle, which is rendering a circle shape, right? And you can play around with the shape size. Like if I made this 200 and this 200 and saved it, it's going to render bigger circles that probably won't fit in the frame I have here, but right, but you get the point. Let me change this to back to 100. Okay, and inside the div tag, I put one of my values, which happened to be department. Now, why this is kind of mind-blowing is, again, CSS can render lots of different stuff, and I'm imagining using CSS to do a pretty complicated looking visual with Power BI data wired up into it, and oh yeah, this like really nice wrapping behavior that you would expect from web stuff. Things off the top of my head that I would probably add to this presentation are like doing some kind of stoplight thing based on values, like green, yellow, or red circles based on data, right? We already know we can do conditional formatting in here, right? We already know that technique. I could say like if sales for this department were between 1,000 and 2,000, then do a class of like green. If sales were like less than 1,000, do a class of yellow. We already know that we can do that kind of stuff here, right? So I thought that was pretty mind-blowing. One last thing before we take questions. I just want to mention there's this thing called static groups. This is because I wasn't aware of what was possible. I don't want to confuse people, but this is working. But when you look into this static group technique, let me just pull it up real quick. Static tables and totals. Without knowing how to use that group by function or roll-up group function, my first stab at solving this problem was I built tables for each aggregation level. Okay, so this is a long-winded one that I don't recommend doing, but it's easier to understand, I think. Here I have a table called year totals, right? I'm just totaling everything for the year. Here I've got quarter totals, grouping on the quarter. And here I've got month totals, right? I don't know how to do grouping, so I'm copying and pasting a lot of code here, and I'm building separate tables. And then when I construct my final results, what am I doing? I'm filtering my quarter totals on Q1. I'm filtering, and then I'm concatenating my months underneath, right? Remember I said concatenate X accepts a table and filter returns a table. So here I'm hard coding, filtering on 1, 2, 3. Here I'm filtering on Q2, and I'm copying and pasting this whole block. This is not a technique that I recommend doing, but it's in there because, you know, when you don't know, that's what you do. And that's what I did. And I created something that looked awesome. It worked. But the reality is, if this two row groups and 3 row group examples are the better way to go. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. Yeah, so one last thing. If I were to go to the HTML tables, I just think this is so cool. Like okay, so like if I went to where's HTML helper measures, if I wanted to change my row width here, just pay attention to the left here. So I have all this space here. Let's say I wanted to make that 80. By changing it in one place, all my tables are going to render to the new column width. I just think that's so cool. Anyway, all right, so that's pretty much the demo. Client was happy. Adobe was very happy with the technique. They didn't know that was possible. And for me, I think my next area of exploration is going to be this stuff, rendering essentially custom visuals using CSS and not that much code to create custom KPIs. And maybe that's a subject of another talk. But an interesting thing to approach, instead of developing custom visuals in Visual Studio, it's a tedious process and a whole different skill set that you may not even need. So, all right, with that, open it up to questions, and I will add the questions if they're good to the deck. All right.